you, the viewers, love your dogs. Your dog is not created. We'll just use the term.
What the heck did he just say to Muslims? You love your dogs? He just said to Muslims, you love your dogs? I'm guessing he doesn't know, because otherwise that would be something you're trying to throw in there if you're trying to tick people off.
Would you say that that is an evidence that it's not a multi-personal God or a triune God?
Not when speaking to a Christian.
Assalamu alaikum to all the Muslims that are going to be watching, and I hope everybody else that is watching is having a good day. And today we are going to be having an interview with Rabbi Tovia Singer. How are you doing today?
Wa alaikum salam. It was very, very nice to be with you.
That is funny, right? She says, Assalamu alaikum to all the Muslims. And he says, well, alaikum assalam. Like he's one of the Muslims. It's pretty wild.
The first verse that I wanted to ask you about was, it's in Genesis 1.
Oh.
Right? So in Genesis 1, it's verses 26 through 27. God is speaking, and he says, let us create man in our image. How would you respond to somebody who says that this is evidence of a multi-personal or triune God?
Wait, you got to stop here. So here's something everybody should have in their thoughts right now. Ask yourself, when you hear Tovia say this, has this interpretation ever occurred to you? Or does this sound to you like desperation to deal with the text? Anyways, listen to Tovia.
What a tragedy. That people should hold such a holy book and worship idolatry when doing that. So as it turns out, man is created in a unique way. We know that in the book of Genesis. It's also in the Quran. In that, man is binary, which means God collected the clay of the earth and blew into it his spirit. In Arabic, it's kind of like a word like nefesh in Hebrew. So therefore, man is made of two things. Unlike frogs and chickens, and I know you, the viewers, love your dogs. Your dog is not created. We'll just use the term.
What the heck did he just say to Muslims? You love your dogs? He just said to Muslims, you love your dogs? I'm guessing he doesn't know, because otherwise that would be something you're trying to throw in there if you're trying to tick people off, and he's obviously not trying to tick people off. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. Now, guys, you do have Muslims who don't take the passage, who don't believe in the hadiths that talk about killing dogs and stuff like that. But Korra, she's in the camp that would take those hadiths very seriously, and he just said, "Hey, and I know you guys love your dogs."
Kind of like a word like nefesh in Hebrew. So therefore, man is made of two things. Unlike frogs and chickens, and I know you, the viewers, love your dogs. Your dog is not created. We'll just use the term in the image of God, and I don't know what that means, but that means a dog or a gorilla does not have a divine soul in it. When God came to creating man, he took the clay of the earth. And what's striking is that we now know that we're actually made of stardust, which is very, very striking. He shaped it into the form of a man and then blew into it his spirit. So if in some way the creation of man was conveying, as Christians argue, the doctrine of the Trinity, then why isn't Jesus also creating light? Or why isn't he creating the animals or the fish? Why doesn't he say, let us make fish?
Wait, what? Did he say, why doesn't Jesus create?
So yeah, but he's saying the us doesn't appear until verse 26. Mm-hmm. Now, people maybe miss what he's saying the us refers to. When God says, let us, the others that he's referring to are the earth and the breath. So God, together with Mother Earth and this stuff called soul, is creating, they are coming together and creating man. Okay?
So this is God. So this is God talking to these other things and saying, let us create?
Yeah, the earth and nefesh. That's why he's saying, man's a binary. Man is a combination of earth. And now this idea can be found in people like Maimonides. It's not an ancient Jewish idea so much as what I'll show you in a moment, but this is the sort of thing that you have to do and you're inclined to do if you don't want the Christian option and you realize the inadequacy of the other answers that have been given in history. So basically, though, he's saying that God, together with the earth and nefesh, soul, created man. So that's the us and the our. And then he's saying from that, if this is supposedly Jesus, then why doesn't it say us earlier in Genesis?
Or why isn't he creating the animals or the fish? Why doesn't it say, let us make fish?
This is just stupid.
Yeah, it's colossally stupid, but think about this. So, and it's just stupid on so many levels, but let me just throw this in here real quick. He thinks he's doing a bang-up job. He's saying, when it comes to the creation of man, we've got something unique here, right? Unlike these other things, they're not made up of. And so he does this little diversion thing about man being made up of stardust and so forth. But wait a minute, isn't it equally true that everything else, right? Fish are made up of stardust, right? Tovia is trying to justify the us and our language on the grounds that what man is made up of is this other stuff, the ground and the breath. And supposedly this isn't true in the case of other things, but it is true in the case of stardust. Other things are made up. Now, by the way, he's also equivocating here. The idea that something is made up of something is not the same thing as being made by something, right? If I make a statue out of marble, it's made up of marble. It's not made by marble. The marble didn't do anything. The marble's passive. This is why I say that Tovia, who's trying to plug his other deities in here to the us and our, ends up becoming a associator, right? Somebody who associates partners with God, because he's trying to say that the us and our, the word in Genesis, or the language there, it's a cohortative in Hebrew, which is like a exhortation. It'd be like David said to me, hey, let's respond to this video. Let us respond to this video. It's a cohortative. He's exhorting me or saying, let's do this. That's what's happening in Genesis 1:26. God is addressing someone, saying, let us do this. And Tovia says that's the earth and that's the breath. So they have to be actively involved in this work. So that's a huge problem for Tovia, unless, of course, he just consistently suppresses the implications of what he's saying. But if he's consistent, then he is, in fact, by saying that God is addressing stardust or clay or whatever, he is making them co-creators with God. So Tovia thinks the first initial signs of personal plurality are in verse 26, right? That's the whole point when he says, why only here and not before that? But as I've pointed out before, God is already speaking. Speaking is an inescapably social phenomena. It doesn't take place between non-persons or even a solitary person, unless that person has had social contact, right? Unless they're a social being. So for example, we've mentioned, like, if you have a kid that grows up on a deserted island with no other human beings, it's not going to develop a language. It's not going to have developed speech. This is something that's used to communicate. It takes place between persons. So the immediate problem that Tovia has to deal with long before he gets to verse 26 is why God is portrayed as a personal being doing the sort of thing that happens between persons, not just one person, but between multiple persons. If God is speaking to someone, well, don't you think one of the most obvious candidates for who he might be speaking to is somebody already mentioned in the context, right? The Spirit of God is mentioned in the context, brooding over the creation. That word is only used one other time in the Torah at the very end, or near the very end, in Deuteronomy 32, where it speaks of God brooding over the people of Israel.
In that portion of the passage, the way that I usually interpret it is, so in Genesis 1, verse 26, it says, let us make man in our image. The verse following right after that, I believe it's verse 27, it then repeats. And
yes, the verse after verse 26 would be verse 27. Anyway.
So God made man in his image. Would you say that that is evidence that it's not a
that should be the name for Tovia's God, Shirk Dirt.
Shirk Dirt. Shirk Dirt.
You probably can't tell at this point. It'll become more apparent in a moment, but she didn't even get what Tovia said. No. Tovia's rambling was already incoherent for her. And so what she's saying, how about this? And that's not Tovia's answer. And Tovia's actually going to disagree with this. But the funny thing is, the answer that she's giving actually has, it seems to me, earlier pedigree than the answer he gave. So she at least has that going for her, that there were people before the ones that Tovia is relying on for his explanation that said this.
Let's see, because this sounds like the same thing she said in her debate. But let's just go to the next verse.
So God made man in his image. Would you say that that is an evidence that it's not a multi-personal God or a triune God?
Not when speaking to a Christian. It means if you as a Muslim and I as a Jew were having a conversation, because we worship one true God, the only true God, one
Allah,
being one person, alone. So we can have that conversation, you and I, and we would agree on that. That's correct. Let us, and then it goes to the singular. But the problem is when engaging a Christian, and both you and I do that, we don't want to fight. We want them to repent of idolatry. That's our goal, or else what are we doing here? So the Christian would then go, aha, that's the nature of Jesus. There is a triune nature, a three persons, and a hypostatic union, all grotesque Greek philosophical ideas that the church still to this day doesn't agree on. But whatever that means, they'd say, aha. So there you have the plurality of the multi-persons, and then you have the oneness in verse 27. And that's why, as an apologist, you're a person who engages in apologetics, you're opening the door for Christians to go, yeah, there's the three and one, three and then one. And in fact, I would just say, and I think you would agree with me, it doesn't really answer the question. We really want to know, why is man created of multiple things? Now we know we are actually, in some way, we have an immortal soul, and neither of us are going to pretend to know exactly what that means, but we're created in God's image in some metaphysical but grand plan. The whole world is created for us. So I believe that you always want to give the clear, direct answer, and this, of course,
when he says us, the world is created for us, what he's leaving out for her is that the us in the metaphysical context of what he's referring to in the soul, from his worldview, would be specifically the Jewish people, not Gentiles. You don't possess the same soul that he's talking about, as far as he's concerned.
Yeah. So I'm just shocked that he's going, and no, don't go with that. Go with this clear answer that I gave about the stardust. And it's like, wait, what?
So what's interesting here, so I said that the answer that she's giving is one that has some precedent in earlier Jewish sources. So in Genesis Rabbah, you actually have a number of different explanations given. But in one place in Genesis Rabbah, it mentions a particular rabbi, Rabbi Simlai. It says, Rabbi Simlai said, wherever you find a point supporting the Manim, and as an aside here, Manim, in some people's opinion, means Gentiles, perhaps Christians, but more cogent research has demonstrated it sometimes means aberrant Jews, at least aberrant from the perspective of the sages that are codifying.
Yeah, mainstream in Jewish Orthodoxy, that would refer to any kind of heretical Jew specifically. Very often in the Talmud and other Midrashic sources, it means Jews who have apostatized and turned to Christianity, but generally it can mean heretics. It's less used for Gentiles. It's more used for Jews who have gone astray. But it can mean Gentiles with heretical views.
When you think about it, it has to be Jews of some sort, because the objections that are being raised on the basis of the Hebrew text. A number of these things aren't going to be noticed in translation. So in this particular case, it says, this particular rabbi Simlai said, whenever you find a point supporting the Manim, notice he says supporting them, you find the refutation at its side. They asked him again, what is meant by, and God said, let us make man? And then the rabbi says, read what follows. It doesn't say God's created man, but God created. So what this rabbi is doing is he's saying, look, the next verse uses the singular, not the plural. But then here's how this ends. When the Manim went out, that is, having been answered by Rabbi Simlai, when the Manim went out, his disciples, the rabbi's disciples, said to him, them you have dismissed with a mere makeshift, but how will you answer us? I love that last line. What they're saying is, oh, they fell for it. You said something that it's like Tovia, right? If you're talking to Christians, you say this, because that'll work with them. So this rabbi is basically coming up with an answer that will dupe this party. And but then his disciples say, what are you going to tell us? Because what they're reflecting is the idea that what you have done by your explanation is you've negated one text by affirming the other. But we affirm the whole text, right? We don't say that one portion is true at the expense of another. You have to interpret all of it in a harmonious way. And so you can't just dismiss the plurals on the basis of the singular. And Tovia basically said this, didn't he? Tovia said, what the Christian's going to do is say, you just fall into our hands.
He said that won't work. That won't work against Christian.
Yeah, because the Christian's going to say, yeah, unity and plurality. There you have it.
Hey, that'd be a funny little video. Rabbi Tovia Singer destroys Korra's lie about Genesis 1:26 and 27. That's funny. And then have him in the thumbnail scolding her. That won't work, dummy. Anyway. Good to know.
Poor Korra.
Genesis chapter 2, verse 6.
I was just going to tell Ash, we've called this Korra's Rebellion, and Tovia has joined it.
I don't know if you saw in the chat, I responded. So Tovia always talks about how he's a Kohen, a priest from the line of Aaron. so it makes it doubly funny.
Oh, that is extra funny. That is cool.
Heaven, which we find in the next chapter, where God collects the clay of the earth and breathes in the spirit of life, which is found in the Torah. Of course, it's in the Quran.
Yes.
It's so strange how she, like, if she's talking to Christians, she's like real snappy back and stuff like this. When she's in the presence of a rabbi, she's just, I mean, he just said, you're wrong. Don't try that. It won't work. And you need to use my explanation, which you won't, because you obviously didn't even understand a word of it and probably weren't even listening. And she's just going,
yes, Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi. Whatever you say, Rabbi.
I don't think it's deference and respect. It's more the fact that she's read his comment section where all kinds of Christians become Muslims after watching his videos. So
gotta love it.
So in terms of the language that's used in Genesis 1:26, if a Christian were to come to you and ask, what is the reason for this plurality in the passage when it says, let us make man in our image? What is the significance?
He already answered that.
Yeah, she wasn't paying attention.
She doesn't get it at all.
Yeah, it seems like she just had questions lined up and she's just reading them, even though, okay, let's see. I wonder if he's going to say, I already talked about that. It's stardust, lady, stardust.
This plurality, if not a multi-personal God.
Oh, so we answer very simply, and that is God is summoning both the physical and the spiritual and saying, let us make man in our image. When God created animals earlier, or fish the day before, the stars and the moon on day 4, did God summon the nefesh, the soul? The answer is no. And that's why there's no us. It's so
But they're made of stardust.
That when man is being created, God is actually using something else besides him,
Fish
meaning something that has already been created, namely the clay of the earth. So saying us, he's never done this before, and that's why you'll never find us prior to it. The Christians are going to be in a terrible predicament here. Now, we don't want them to be in a terrible predicament. Korra and I just want Christians to repent of the doctrine of the Trinity.
Listen to him. He keeps saying the reason for the us is because now God is using the earth, which he created. Everything else was ex nihilo. What does it say immediately before this in Genesis 1? It says in verse 24, God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures. So what do you mean, Tovia? His whole argumentation doesn't even match the text. This ought to blow the mind of any Christian who hasn't heard these things before, but this is how this section of Genesis is rendered. So this is not a Christian source. It's a Jewish Targum. It's a rendering of the Hebrew text into Aramaic. It says, and the Lord said, let us create man in our likeness, similar to ourselves, and let them rule over the fishes of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And the memra of the Lord, which is Aramaic for logos, or logos, the word, and the word of the Lord created the man in his own likeness, in a likeness from before the Lord he created him, male and his partner, he created them. And the glory of the Lord, blessed them, and the memra of the Lord said to them, be strong and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. So notice, according to the Targum, it uses 3 terms here to speak of who the us and our are. It's not the earth, it's not nefesh or anything else. It's the Lord, his logos, and his glory. The glory is also speaking here. The glory blessed them. The glory is the one who endows them with a blessing. And what's further interesting in the Targum is, and Ash can, I don't know if you've ever looked at this, but you can look at it and confirm this, but if you look at the very first verse of Genesis 2, the very first verse where it says, and thus were completed the heavens and the earth, in the Masoretic text, which is post-Christian, and so reflects the later vowel pointings of the Masoretes, so they're giving their interpretation of the consonantal text. It renders it as a passive, thus were completed the heavens and the earth. But if you just read the consonantal text, there's another possibility. And that other possibility is how it was taken by the Targums, or in this Targum. It says, and thus they completed the heavens and the earth. And the they refers back to the us and the our of Genesis. So wait a minute, Tovia. Remember Tovia said, why isn't it the case that the us and the our were involved prior to Genesis 1:26? Well, according to the Targum, it was the us and the our of verse 26 that were responsible for creating and finishing the heavens and the earth, the whole kit and caboodle. So
doesn't Job also say that the spirit that's referenced in Genesis 1 is actually the one that created man?
Yeah, in Job 34, he says, the Spirit of God has made me. The Spirit of God made me.
All right, we ready for more Tovia here? Let's see.
I was going
to add
the Christians
one there.
Good.
So something really interesting about Tovia discussing this verse at all is that Tovia makes the claim that the Septuagint, which is heavily used in Christianity, that it's a made-up Greek translation of the church, right? What's interesting, though, is that he claims that the original Septuagint, which was just the 5 books, that's the real Septuagint, right? And it only is the 5 books. And we know that's not true because we have manuscript evidence to show that there were translations of the writings of prophets as well. What's interesting, though, is that the Talmud itself actually says that the rabbis who originally translated the Septuagint intentionally put in errors so that it would be clear that it's different, right? And not to confuse the Gentiles that there might accidentally be polytheists. So the Talmud says that the rabbis who translated the Septuagint rendered, let us make man in our image, as I will make man in my image, so that the pagans wouldn't be confused and think that Jews are polytheists. Well, 2 things there. Number 1, that shows that this is an incredibly problematic verse for Judaism. But number 2, that would mean that the Septuagint that we have as Christians is an authentic Jewish translation, because it doesn't render it that way.
But
it renders it as plural.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a little lag on your end, so if I sound like I'm cutting you off, that's why.
No worries.
Number 1, it is true in terms of the original legend that's told from the letter of Aristeas and so forth. The original translation that was made was of the first 5 books, but it's also true that the other books were, over the course of the pre-Christian centuries, also translated. But you can tell differences in translation style and that sort of thing between the different books. But what's interesting, you might be interested in this. There's a Jewish Christian guy named Brian Crawford. I can find it if you don't find it in a search, but Brian Crawford actually wrote a response to Tovia, and it's pretty devastating when it comes to the Septuagint. Not only does it, he's actually directly responding to Tovia, but it also shows problems with the Talmudic discussion as well. But yeah, good point on the plural there. I mean, there's no Septuagint manuscript that has it in the singular, so that's just, there's no evidence to justify that.
Right, it's a double whammy kind of, because it shows that it's a problematic verse, and it corroborates that our Septuagint is an authentic Jewish translation.
All right, let's check out some more of this here.
Stated in the prologue of John, why doesn't it say anywhere else? What's unique from man is that man literally is summoning 2 things. Number 1, the physical material of the world that he had already created. Everything else that God created was created ex nihilo, which means from absolutely nothing.
See, he's playing a game again. Like he's and Korra, again, she's just over there defenseless, poor thing. The salvation of Dawa going to the rabbi to help her do what all the Dawagandis haven't been able to do without her. She's helpless. So he says the justification for saying it's us, and us means earth and so forth, is because everything else was created ex nihilo. He's playing a game with her. Everything was created ex nihilo in the beginning. But subsequent to that, it speaks of God forming and making things from that which he made. But the animals are made from the ground too. Right? Like, where does he get, the trees and everything else are coming up out of the ground. He even says, let them produce, right? Let the earth produce vegetation and so forth. So he wants to pretend that there's something that necessitates saying us here because he's talking to the earth, because it's not true in the case of other things. But it is true in the case of other things. Tobia's whole theory doesn't hold together here.
Yeah. That's what unique is about God. But when it came to man, he took something that already existed, the clay of the earth, and then something else. And that is that metaphysical soul, that spirit, whatever that is in us. And that's why it's let us. Those 2 things combined together. And we have man. And again, that's why God doesn't say, let us make light. Doesn't say, it's only man that's binary. It's completely unique.
I see.
Ash, is it the case that the Hebrew doesn't speak of animals having a soul? Now, obviously, we would say there's something different between man and the animals. We are the image of God. But Tobia's pretending that, again, this language is different
doesn't
here.
Teach a metaphysical soul for inanimate things as well.
Yeah, but I mean, it uses the term soul for animals all over the place.
Right. I mean, in Jewish tradition, you see all over, even in prayers, like the soul of every living thing. So animals would be included in that. You even have inanimate objects having a sort of a soul-like thing, sparks of the divine, and so on in Kabbalistic terminology. He's not. Here's the thing. This is why I feel bad for her. Okay. He very clearly in his interactions, he will speak at the level that he thinks he can manipulate, right? So when he didn't know that I have a lot of friends that had converted to Christianity, he's telling me all these tales about how Christians only convert for blah, 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 which is not true. So he didn't realize in that case. but he's basically assessing how dumb he thinks somebody is, and then going to the tier of argument that he thinks he can get away with that person. So he doesn't respect her at all, even as far as her intelligence and her basic comprehension of these things goes, right? Which I don't know if she is or isn't. He obviously thinks she is not very intelligent, because that's the level of argument he's using with her. It's an indicator of how he feels about her.
This reminds me of the Dawa bros. Like the Dawa guys, they won't use certain arguments. We say if people know the Dawa script, they won't use that argument against someone who knows the Dawa script. But then if they're talking to someone who has absolutely no clue what they're talking about, then they'll start using that argument that they know wouldn't work against someone who's familiar with the argument. They know it won't work against them, but I'm talking to an ignorant person, and now I can use my argument from the perfect preservation of the Quran, or my argument from scientific miracles. I know this wouldn't work against any actual like Christian apologist or polemicist or something like that, but now I'm talking to a person who doesn't know anything about Islam, and now I can run this argument. That's kind of what this is reminding me of. Like, he knows this argument wouldn't work against someone who kind of knows the issue, but he's using it on Korra, which means here's a completely ignorant person, and I can run this argument, and she's just gonna lap it all up. She's gonna lap it up, and I'm gonna say, yep, it's God talking to the dust and dirt and everything else, and they're all gathering together, as co-creators. Good to know.